The picture they were working from just became obsolete. Not gradually, not through a series of small corrections that allowed them to update their understanding incrementally, to revise the model slowly enough that the revision did not feel destabilizing all at once. In a single moment where something you did or said or revealed or simply were produced a quality of clarity about who you actually are that their prior version of you could not contain. The prior version of you is gone, replaced in their understanding by the actual version. And the actual version is considerably more than what they had filed under your name. The speechless is the sound of a model collapsing. I want to begin with what they thought you were, because understanding the picture they had built is what makes the moment of its collapse legible. They had a reading of you built from the available evidence, from whatever interactions had occurred between you, from whatever impressions had been formed, from the specific, limited, almost always incomplete picture that any person builds of another person based on what that other person has allowed to be visible in the contexts they have shared. And the picture they built had a particular quality, manageable, not consciously, not in the sense of someone who explicitly decided that you were manageable and who acted on that decision with full awareness of what they were doing, in the more ordinary, more insidious sense of simply not having updated their model to include dimensions of you that had not yet made themselves visible. They assumed they had the full picture. They did not have the full picture. What they had was the surface of you, the accessible version, the version that is available in contexts that do not require or invite the full version to come forward, the version that is real but incomplete, that shows certain things about who you are while leaving the rest of it in the background where most people never think to look. They were not looking, and then something happened that made looking irrelevant, because what they had not been looking for simply arrived. Let me describe the specific moment of realization, because it came through in the reading with a particularity that I want to deliver accurately. There was a moment where the prior version of you collided with the actual version, not a conflict, not an argument or a confrontation or any of the more dramatic forms of collision that people sometimes imagine produce this kind of shift, a simpler, quieter, more undeniable collision. A moment where you did something or said something or responded to something or simply held yourself in some particular way that was entirely inconsistent with the prior version, not inconsistent in the sense of being false, inconsistent in the sense of revealing a dimension that the prior version had no room for. And the specific quality of that inconsistency, the visible gap between what they had filed under your name and what was now present and unambiguous in front of them, produced the speechless. Not because you shocked them through some dramatic reveal, because you simply were, in that moment, more than they had room for. And I want to speak to what specifically they encountered, because the speechless is real and the content of what produced it matters. They encountered your depth, not depth as a vague general compliment about the quality of a person, depth in the specific measurable sense of someone who has been thinking about things that most people have not been thinking about, who has arrived at conclusions through genuine, sustained engagement with questions rather than through the adoption of available answers, who carries a relationship with their own complexity that produces, in certain moments, a quality of insight or perspective or simply a way of being in a situation that exceeds what could have been predicted from the surface version. Depth, when it becomes visible, is always slightly startling because most people, most of the time, are working from the surface, engaging with the available version of other people, not because they are shallow or incurious, but because the full depth of most people is not something that the ordinary circumstances of most interactions creates conditions for. What happened is that the ordinary circumstances became extraordinary enough in some specific moment that the depth came forward. Not all of it, some of it. And some of it was enough. Let me speak to what the speechless actually feels like from inside the person experiencing it. Because speechless is a physical state before it is an emotional one. The specific, involuntary, slightly embarrassing quality of having something to say and finding that the words are not available, that the usual, reliable mechanism of turning thought into language has briefly failed, because what needs to be said is something for which the existing vocabulary is insufficient. They had words for the version of you they thought they knew. Those words no longer fit. And the new words, the ones that would be adequate to the actual version of you that has just revealed itself, have not yet been located, are not immediately available, are somewhere in the interior of a person who is still catching up to what they just encountered and who does not yet have language for the catching up. In that gap between the inadequate old words and the not yet found new words, the speechless, I want to speak to what happens in their understanding after the initial speechless, because the moment itself is only the beginning. What follows the moment, the process of revision that the moment initiates, is where the real significance lives. They are revising not just their picture of you, everything that was built on top of the picture of you. Every assumption about what you want, what you can handle, what you need, what you deserve, what is possible between you and them, that was built on the foundation of the inadequate prior version. When the foundation changes, everything built on it has to be reconsidered. And what I am reading in their energy right now is the specific, slightly disorienting quality of someone who is in the middle of a significant revision, who is going back through the history of your interactions with the corrected understanding and seeing them differently, who is rereading in retrospect things you did and said that they misread at the time because they were reading them through the lens of the prior version. With the corrected understanding, those things read differently. Some of them reveal more than was previously registered, and the more that is being revealed in retrospect is adding to the revision that the moment of speechless initiated. They are understanding you better with every piece of their history with you. They re-examine through the corrected lens. They are understanding you better with every piece of their history with you. They re-examine through the corrected lens. I want to describe what that re-examination actually feels like, because it is not simply an intellectual exercise of going back through memories. It is a more visceral, more uncomfortable, more illuminating experience than that. It is the experience of watching your own misreadings become visible, of going back to a specific moment in the history between you, a conversation or an interaction or something you said that you had read and responded to in a particular way, and seeing from the corrected understanding that what you thought was happening was not what was happening, that what you read as one thing was actually another, that the person in front of you was operating from a place and a depth that you did not have the framework to register accurately at the time, and the specific, slightly queasy quality of realizing not just that you misread something, but how you misread it, what the misread said about the limitation of your prior picture, what you missed and what you failed to honor, because the missing and the failure were both invisible to you until this moment. That quality of retrospective understanding is not comfortable, but it is producing in them a level of attention to the real version of you that the prior version never required. And that attention is going to produce a very different quality of engagement going forward. Tell me in the comments if this is landing on something specific. If there is a particular person who encountered a particular version of you that surprised them. If you felt in some interaction the quality of someone recalibrating their understanding in real time, if the speechless I am describing matches something you witnessed, even if you did not have this framework for understanding it, I want to know. I want to speak to something about you that this reading is pointing toward and that I think is worth examining directly. You have been allowing people to work from the incomplete version, not deceptively, not because you were deliberately concealing dimensions of yourself or playing a strategic game of revealing less than you are in order to produce a particular impression, but in the specific Virgo way of not offering more than the situation invites, of matching the depth of what you bring to the depth of what the context can support, of not putting your full interior on the table in situations that have not demonstrated they can receive it without mishandling it. That is not hiding. That is calibration. The calibration is appropriate. The depth of your interior is not something to be distributed without discrimination to every context and every person who happens to be present. Some things deserve to be held close until the conditions for their offering are right. But the consequence of the calibration is that people build their pictures of you from the portion you have made available. And when the calibration changes, when the conditions shift and the fuller version comes forward, the gap between the picture and the person is sometimes larger than the observer was prepared for. That is what happened. The conditions shifted, and what came forward in response to the shift is what produced the speechless. That is what happened. The conditions shifted, and what came forward in response to the shift is what produced the speechless. I want to name something about the specific quality of what came forward, because I think it is useful for you to understand precisely what it was that produced the impact it produced. It was not a performance. The depth that came forward in that moment was not something you deployed for effect, was not something you had been holding back until the right strategic moment and then released deliberately, was not a reveal designed to produce a particular impression. It was simply what came forward when the situation invited it. And that specific unperformed, simply because it was appropriate quality of what came forward, is precisely the thing that makes it so striking to someone who is accustomed to people performing their best qualities rather than simply possessing them. The performed version has a quality of effort that is usually visible, a slight straining toward impression, a quality of someone showing you something rather than simply being it. What came forward in you had no strain, no effort of presentation, just the depth present and available and genuine because the moment called for it and you simply brought what you have. That effortlessness is the part that produces the speechless, not the depth itself, the depth without the effort. I want to speak to the fear that is present alongside the speechless, because the title names both, and they deserve to be examined together rather than separately. Why fear? Not the alarming kind, not fear of you as a threat or a danger or anything that casts you in a negative light. Fear in the specific, slightly intimate sense of encountering something that exceeds your current capacity to fully manage in relation to. People are comfortable with versions of other people that they understand, that they can predict, that they have calibrated their own behavior and expectations in relation to. The version of you that they had been working with was one they had, in some sense, gotten their bearings around, had a sense of how to be with, had their own positioning relative to sort it out. The version of you that just revealed itself is not one they have their bearings around. And not having your bearings around someone is not comfortable. It requires a recalibration not only of how you understand the other person, but of how you position yourself in relation to them, of what is appropriate, of what is possible, of what the dynamic between you actually is, given what the actual version of both of you turns out to be. That recalibration is producing the fear, not fear of you, fear of the space that has opened up where the prior comfortable certainty was. Let me speak to what comes next for them, because the fear and the speechless are not a resting place, they are a transition. What follows the fear and the speechless is a choice. Everyone who encounters a version of another person that exceeds their prior picture has to make a choice about what to do with the encounter. They can retreat to the comfortable prior version, find ways to explain away what they saw, and reestablish the understanding that felt manageable. They can sit with the discomfort of the revision and allow their picture of you to update to something more accurate, more complete, more honest, or they can do something more demanding than either of those. They can step toward the version they just encountered, toward the fuller, more complex, harder to have a comfortable grip on, but considerably more real version of you, toward the actual dynamic that would exist between two people if both of them were fully present as what they actually are. What I am reading is that stepping toward is what they are moving in the direction of, not without difficulty. The fear is real, and the recalibration takes time, and the settling into a new understanding of who you are and what that means for the dynamic between you is not an instant process. But the direction is toward, not away. I want to address something about your experience of this moment, because this reading has been primarily about what is happening in them, and I want to bring it back to you before we close. There is a specific quality of being seen correctly that is different from any other quality of being seen. Being seen inaccurately, whether underestimated or overestimated, produces a particular loneliness. The loneliness of not being met at the level you actually operate at, of having to navigate the relationship from the position of the incomplete version of yourself that the other person has access to, rather than from the full version. What happened in the moment of the speechless was the beginning of being seen correctly. Not completely, not yet. The revision is still in progress, and the full picture takes time to assemble, but the direction of the seeing has changed. The prior picture has been disrupted enough that what replaces it is going to be more accurate, more specific, more able to hold the full version of you rather than only the portion that had been visible until now. That change in the direction of being seen is not small. It is one of the more significant things that can happen in the dynamic between two people. And it is happening. That change in the direction of being seen is not small. It is one of the more significant things that can happen in the dynamic between two people. And it is happening. I want to add something to this because I think it is the piece that matters most for how you carry yourself going forward. What comes next in the dynamic between you does not require you to do anything to maintain or encourage or manage what has been set in motion. The revision is underway. The recalibration is happening. The movement toward the fuller understanding of who you are is occurring on its own, driven by the momentum of the encounter that produced the speechless, without your active participation in or management of the process. What you did to produce the speechless was simply to be yourself in a moment that called for the full version of yourself. What produces the movement going forward is the same thing, simply continuing to be yourself, not the managed version, not the version calibrated to what the prior picture of you was expecting, the actual version, the one that came forward in the moment of the speechless, the one that does not require the conditions to be exactly right before it appears because it is simply what you are rather than something you produce for specific occasions. That version, consistently present, is what continues the revision that the moment of speechless initiated. And you produce it by doing nothing different from what you were doing when the speechless happened. Simply being exactly what you are. As we close, one final image. A person sitting quietly, not inactive. The specific, highly active quality of someone who is sitting quietly while a significant amount of revision is occurring in their interior. Who is not doing anything that is visible, but who is doing something that is the most important thing they have done in the context of the relationship with you in a significant amount of time. Understanding you for the first time with the accuracy that was not available before the moment of speechless. For the first time with something closer to the real picture rather than the convenient one. For the first time, genuinely, and in that genuine understanding, something that was not possible before is becoming possible. Not announced, not yet, simply becoming. In the quiet of a person who has been stopped speechless by the realization that what they are dealing with is considerably more significant than they understood themselves to be dealing with. That significance is you, and they are sitting with it, learning to see it clearly,